My name is Curtis, and until just a few days ago, I believed my marriage was steady and secure. I was never under the illusion that it was perfect, no marriage truly is, but I thought we had built something strong, something trustworthy. I had no idea how completely wrong I was. It all began on a seemingly ordinary evening. Nothing felt out of place. No uneasy feeling in my gut. No red flags warning me of what was to come. My wife, Lorna, had been a little distant lately, but I brushed it off as stress. Work had been demanding for both of us, and I figured we just needed some quality time together. In fact, I had even planned a weekend getaway, convinced that a change of scenery might help us reconnect. But I never got the chance to bring it up. That night, I arrived home later than usual, caught up in finishing a project at the office. As I pulled into the driveway, something immediately seemed off. A car was parked outside, one I didn't recognize. It wasn't a neighbor's or a friend's, at least not anyone I knew. A strange unease settled in my stomach, but I pushed it aside. Maybe she had company over. Maybe it was nothing. I had never had a reason to doubt her. At least that's what I told myself. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt different. The house was silent, yet there was an undercurrent of tension that sent a chill through me. It was an energy I couldn't see but could feel in my bones. Then I heard it, laughter. Lorna's. But she wasn't alone. A man's voice joined hers, deep and unsettlingly familiar. My heart pounded as I followed the sound. Every step felt heavier than the last. Rounding the corner into the living room, I froze. Lorna was on the couch, leaning in close to someone I recognized instantly, Nolan. We weren't close friends, but I knew him well enough. He worked with her, and I had met him at office parties and gatherings. I had always assumed he was just a colleague, nothing more. But the way they were looking at each other left no room for doubt. Strangely, my first reaction wasn't anger. It wasn't even sorrow. It was a numbing disbelief, as if my mind refused to accept what my eyes were seeing. I stood there watching my wife, glow with laughter at something another man had said. The way she touched his arm, the quiet intimacy in their posture, it was unmistakable. I didn't explode in fury. I didn't yell accusations. Instead, I did something I never imagined I would. Slowly, I slipped off my wedding ring. That was when Lorna finally noticed me. Her expression shifted instantly. Eyes widening in shock, her posture stiffening as if she had been jolted awake. "Curtis," she began, but I didn't let her continue. With a calmness that felt surreal, I stepped forward and placed the ring on the coffee table between them. "You must have lost this somewhere along the way," I said, my voice even. Nolan's entire body tensed. He understood. He knew exactly what I had just walked in on. "But Lorna?" She hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "Curtis, wait." But I was already walking away. My hands were steady. My voice never wavered. I felt nothing. Or maybe I felt too much, so much that my body simply shut down. As I reached the door, I turned back once, meeting her gaze. "You might want to figure out how you're going to explain this," I told her. "Because whatever you thought this was, it's over." And with that, I left. I had no idea what came next. All I knew was that what had happened was something I never could have predicted. I didn't drive straight home that night, not because I lacked a place to go, but because home no longer felt like home. The house where I had built a life with Lorna suddenly felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Instead, I just drove, letting the city lights blur around me as my mind spun in circles. I replayed the scene over and over in my head. The way she leaned in, the way she laughed at his words, the way Nolan didn't even look guilty. But the strangest part? I still wasn't angry. Maybe it was shock. Maybe my brain hadn't fully caught up with the reality of it all. Instead of rage, I felt a strange calm, like I was watching my own life unravel from a distance. At some point, I pulled into a small, late-night diner. One of those old-fashioned places with a flickering neon sign and a waitress who looked like she had been working there since the 80s. I slid into a booth by the window, ordered a coffee, and stared out into the quiet night. Then my phone buzzed. "Lorna." I didn't answer. Another buzz. Then another. Finally, A text appeared on my screen. Curtis, please come back. We need to talk. I let out a short, bitter laugh. Talk? Now she wanted to talk? Where was this urgency when she was sitting with Nolan? Completely lost in him. Setting my phone face down on the table, I took a slow sip of coffee. The warmth spread through my chest, but it did nothing to comfort me. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Then, another text. This one made my stomach drop. Curtis, please. He's gone. Just come home. I stared at the message, my mind racing. He's gone. Did she throw him out? Did he leave on his own? I didn't know what to do. Why did it seem like she was alone? A part of me, the one that wanted to see her suffer in the silence of her own guilt, considered letting her wait. Letting her sit with what she had done. But curiosity gnawed at me. I couldn't ignore it. I paid my tab, got into my car, and drove back, not out of forgiveness, not because of anger, but because something about her message unsettled me. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed it immediately. The other car, the one that had been parked there when I left earlier, was gone. The house was nearly dark except for the faint glow of a single living room light. Through the window, I saw her silhouette pacing. Stepping inside, I barely had time to take in the sight of her before she turned toward me. Relief flooded her face, her entire body sagging as if she had been holding her breath for hours. Curtis, she exhaled, her voice shaky. I didn't respond. Instead, I shut the door behind me, folding my arms, waiting. She hesitated before stepping forward. He left. As soon as you walked out, he left. I gave a small nod as if that piece of information meant anything to me. Good for him. Lorna flinched at my tone. I didn't mean for you to find out like that. A humorless chuckle escaped me. So, what? You did mean for me to find out? Just not like this. Her face crumpled. No. I never wanted you to find out at all. Wrong answer. My jaw tightened, a flicker of something sharp rising inside me. And that's supposed to make me feel better? She shook her head, tears gathering in her eyes. No, Curtis, she exhaled sharply, her voice breaking. I messed up, okay? I made a terrible mistake. I tilted my head slightly. A mistake. I repeated, my voice steady but cold. How long? She swallowed hard. How long? Silence stretched between us before she finally whispered, a few months. I exhaled through my nose, staring past her as if she had already become a ghost. Months. While I had been convinced that all we needed was a short getaway, she had been sneaking around behind my back. For months. She reached for me, but I took a step back. Don't. Curtis, please, she whispered, her voice fragile. It didn't mean anything. I swear. It was stupid. I was stupid. I finally looked at her, really looked at her. And for the first time in a decade, I saw her for what she truly was. A stranger. Shaking my head, I took a slow step forward, my voice calm in a way that even unsettled me. You have one chance, I said. One chance to tell me the truth. No more lies. No more sugarcoating. Lorna's eyes widened. I am telling you the truth. Are you? I studied her closely, watching for the cracks. And then they appeared. The tears, the guilt, the trembling hands gone. Just for a split second, something else flickered across her face. Something cold. Something calculating. That's when I knew. She wasn't truly sorry. She was afraid. Not of losing me, but of what would happen next. I stood there, watching her, waiting. Waiting for anything, any sign, any word that could prove me wrong. That could make me believe, even for a moment, that the woman I had married still existed beneath all of this. But I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't devastated because she had hurt me. She wasn't crumbling under the weight of our ruined marriage. She was afraid because she had no idea what I was going to do next. The realization hit harder than anything else. Why now? I finally asked, my voice even. Why tonight? Why him? She exhaled unsteadily, rubbing her arms as if she were cold. Curtis, I raised a hand. No. None of that. No, I didn't mean to. No, it was a mistake. Just tell me the truth. Her jaw tightened. Then, after a long pause, she whispered, because I wanted to see if I still could. I blinked. What? Her eyes met mine, glossy with unshed tears, her lips trembling. But I wasn't falling for that anymore. I wanted to see if I still had something. I don't even know how to explain it, Curtis. She shook her head. It felt like we were just going through the motions and I wanted to feel wanted. I didn't plan this. It just happened. A bitter laugh escaped me. Happened? Months, Lorna. You're telling me you just accidentally fell into someone else's arms for months. Her face crumpled. I don't love him. That made me pause. Not because I cared whether she loved him or not, but because I realized something. She hadn't said she loved me either. That silence sat between us, heavy and suffocating. You know, I said, breaking it, I came back here tonight thinking maybe, just maybe, you'd say something that made sense. Something that would at least help me understand why you threw everything away. She stepped forward. Courtesy. I stepped back. No, I cut her off sharply. You don't get to reach for me now. Not after this. Her hands fell to her sides, defeated. I ran a hand through my hair, exhaling slowly. So, what now? I asked. What's the big plan? You said Nolan left. Did he leave for good? Or just long enough for you to figure out how to clean up this mess? Lorna flinched. I told him to leave. Why? She hesitated. I gave a humorless chuckle. Because you got caught? Or because you actually want to fix this? She didn't answer. And that told me everything. I turned toward the door. Curtis, please, she said quickly. Please, don't do this. I halted, my fingers resting on the doorknob. Do what, Lorna? Just don't leave. Stay. Let's talk. Let's figure this out. I turned to face her then, allowing her to see what I had been trying to hide, the exhaustion, the disappointment, the weight of her choices pressing down on me. Figure what out? My voice was barely a whisper. How to pretend this never happened. How to turn back time and make everything the way it was before. She swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. You still don't understand, do you? I shook my head, my frustration mounting. Her lower lip quivered. Curtis, you broke us, I said, cutting her off. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I know. No. I stepped closer, my voice calm but firm. You don't know. You don't know what it's like to look at someone and realize they were never who you thought they were. To feel like every moment of trust was just an illusion. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing. But this time I didn't reach out to comfort her. That instinct, the one that had always made me want to shield her from pain, was gone. You made your choice, I told her, my voice steady. Now I'm making mine. Without another word, I turned the knob, stepped outside, and let the cold night air wrap around me. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. But what happened next? That was the part no one ever saw coming. I didn't drive far that night, just circled the city aimlessly, my grip on the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My thoughts churned, colliding between the life I thought we had and the reality of what she had done. The memories, the betrayals, they all mixed into one unbearable storm. At some point, I found myself in front of a cheap motel. The flickering neon vacancy sign buzzed softly in the silence of the night. Without thinking, I pulled into the lot, checked in, and barely registered the words exchanged with the man at the front desk. I just needed somewhere, anywhere, that wasn't filled with the ghosts of my marriage. Lying on the stiff mattress, staring at the ceiling, I waited for the anger to come. The kind of fury that burns through your chest, that makes you want to destroy something, to demand answers that would never satisfy. But it never came. Instead, there was only emptiness. At some point, exhaustion won over, and I drifted into a restless sleep until my phone buzzed, jolting me awake. I squinted at the screen. Lorna. I ignored it. A minute later, another message. Curtis, please. Just tell me where you are. Then another. I don't want to lose you. A bitter chuckle escaped my lips. Too late for that, sweetheart. More messages flooded in, one after the other. I didn't read them. Instead, I tossed the phone onto the nightstand and pressed my fingers to my temples. What was I supposed to do now? Divorce? Obviously. But how does one begin untangling a decade of life together in a single night? The house, the bank accounts, the friendships we had built, it all suddenly felt like a minefield I had to navigate. I was still lost in thought when a sudden knock on the door made me tense. My breath caught in my throat. No one knew I was here. No one should know. Heart pounding, I got up slowly, crossed the room, and peered through the peephole. Lorna. A sharp tension gripped my chest. How had she found me? I hesitated before cracking the door just enough to see her face. She looked terrible, eyes red, face pale, her expression a mixture of relief and desperation. Curtis, she breathed out. Thank God. I lifted a hand, stopping her. How did you find me? She bit her lip, hesitating. Your location is still linked to my phone from when we shared our accounts. I had to talk to you. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. There's nothing left to talk about. Please. Her voice wavered, barely holding together. Just hear me out. A part of me wanted to slam the door shut, to turn away and never see her again. But against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She entered cautiously, wrapping her arms around herself like she was suddenly aware she didn't belong there. Her breath was shaky as she spoke. Curtis, I know I hurt you. I know I can't take it back. But I swear I was going to end things with him. I was just scared. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Scared of what, exactly? That I'd find out? That he wouldn't want you if I left? She winced. No. Scared of losing us. I shook my head in disbelief. You lost us the second you decided I wasn't enough. Tears streamed down her face. I hate myself for this. I wish I could take it all back. I watched her closely, searching for something real in her words. Some part of me wanted to believe her, to think that this was just a terrible mistake that could be undone. And then she made a fatal mistake. She sniffled, wiped her eyes, and whispered, I already told Nolan it was over. My body stilled. You told him. My voice was quiet, too quiet. So, that means it wasn't over before I caught you? Lorna's breath hitched. I mean I was going to end it. A bitter laugh slipped from my lips. I ran a hand over my face. Wow. Just, wow. Curtis, please, she begged. I don't want to lose you. I looked at her then, really looked at her. And in that moment, the truth hit me with a clarity I should have had from the beginning. She wasn't here because she loved me. She was here because she was losing control. And that was what scared her the most. I took a slow, steady breath, then reached into my pocket. My fingers curled around the cool metal, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. Silently, I pulled off my wedding ring, holding it between us for a brief moment before placing it on the motel nightstand. Lorna's face crumpled, pain flashing in her eyes. Curtis, she whispered, but I met her gaze with a steady voice. You don't have to lose me, Lorna. I took a step back, reaching for the door, pushing it open as I delivered the truth that had been long unspoken. Because I was never yours to begin with. A strangled sob escaped her lips, but I didn't linger to hear more. I walked out, leaving the chapter of my life behind, convinced it was over. I had no idea how wrong I was. Lorna might have stayed in that motel room, but she wasn't done with me, not by a long shot. The following days blurred together. I threw myself back into work, clinging to routine as if it could erase the storm trailing behind me. But no matter how much I tried to move on, I felt the weight of it pressing against my skin like an unseen mark. The betrayal, the exhaustion, the emptiness, it was all still there. And somehow, I felt like everyone could see it. Lorna didn't let go easily. First, it was the texts. Then the calls. I ignored them all. When that didn't work, the emails started. At first, they were desperate, filled with pleading words. Please talk to me. Please don't do this. I love you. It was a mistake. But then something changed. One morning, I opened my inbox to find a single sentence staring back at me. I need to tell you the truth about Nolan. A sharp knot twisted in my stomach. I knew better than to get drawn back in. Yet, despite every warning flashing in my mind, my fingers moved against my will. I typed out a response. I don't care. Don't contact me again. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang. I hesitated, hovering over the decline button. But something, a mix of bitter curiosity and unresolved frustration, made me answer. Lorna's voice was small, uncertain. Curtis, please, just listen to me. I exhaled sharply. You've got 2 minutes. A pause. Then, barely above a whisper, she said, I wasn't the only one. I frowned. What? She took a shaky breath before continuing. Nolan, he's been doing this for years. With other women. Women from work. I wasn't special to him. Just another name on a long list. I ran a hand down my face, feeling the familiar sting of betrayal. And you think that changes anything? No, she admitted, voice thick with regret. But you should know one of those women is married to your boss. My blood turned to ice. I sat up, my grip tightening on the phone. What did you just say? She sniffled. Her name is Melissa. She and Greg have been married for 10 years. And Nolan, he's been with her for months. Just like he was with me. The air seemed to vanish from the room. Greg wasn't just my boss, he was one of my closest friends. The man who had given me my first real shot. The person who had always had my back. The one who had called me family. And now his wife was tangled up with the same man who had shattered my marriage. I could hardly breathe. You're lying, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, doubt crept in. Lorna let out a bitter laugh. I wish I was. But if you don't believe me, ask Greg yourself. I ended the call without another word. For the first time since this whole mess started, the betrayal I carried wasn't just mine anymore. I was about to drag someone else into the storm, and I had no idea just how deep it would go. I sat frozen, my phone clenched in my hand, my mind racing. Greg. The man I trusted. The man who had always valued loyalty, honesty, and hard work. And his wife had been sleeping with the same person who had torn my life apart. I had a choice. I could walk away, bury this, let Greg find out on his own the way I had. Or I could do what no one had done for me. With a steady hand, I dialed his number. It rang twice before his voice came through, easygoing, completely unaware. Curtis, my man. What's up? I hesitated for a moment, then made my decision. We need to talk. Now. The shift in his tone was immediate. What's wrong? Not over the phone. Meet me at Ray's in 20. A long pause. Then I'll be there. The diner was nearly empty when I arrived. I chose a booth near the back, my hands clasped together as I ran through the words in my head. How do you tell someone their wife has been unfaithful? How do you shatter the illusion of trust they've built? Greg walked in 10 minutes later, confusion etched across his face. He slid into the booth across from me, setting his phone on the table. All right, he said, his concern growing. You've got me worried. What's going on? I took a slow breath. It's about Melissa. His brow furrowed. What about her? I met his gaze, unwavering. She's having an affair. Greg went completely still. The silence between us thickened, stretching until he let out a dry chuckle. Is this some kind of joke? I shook my head. His face hardened. What the hell are you talking about? I leaned forward, my voice firm. It's Nolan. The moment the name left my lips, I saw his expression shift. The way his jaw tensed. The flicker of something dark in his eyes. You're lying, he said, his tone flat, but the edge in it was unmistakable. Wordlessly, I pulled out my phone, opened Lorna's last message, and slid it across the table. Read it. Greg's eyes scanned the screen, and I watched as the reality settled in. His fingers clenched around the phone, his nostrils flaring. Then, without a word, he stood up. Greg? But he was already on the move. I hurriedly tossed some bills onto the table and rushed after him. Where are you going? I demanded. He didn't stop walking. To get answers. Greg, wait. I reached out, grabbing his arm to make him face me. You don't want to do anything reckless. His eyes burned with something dark and dangerous. Don't tell me what I want to do, Curtis. I exhaled sharply. Trust me, I understand exactly how this feels. But you need to think before you act. Greg's fists clenched at his sides. So what? I just let her get away with it. I shook my head. No. But you also don't go in blind. His jaw tightened. Then what do you suggest? I didn't have an immediate answer. Not yet. But one thing was certain, this wasn't over. Not even close. Greg paced back and forth, his hands balling into fists and then releasing. His breathing was sharp, uneven. I could see it in his expression, he was barely keeping himself together. And I understood that feeling all too well. Betrayal wasn't just painful. It changed something deep inside. It made you question everything. We need proof, I said at last. Greg stopped mid-step, turning to me. Proof? What more do I need than this? He waved my phone in the air. Your wife admitted it. That should be enough. I shook my head. It's not. If you confront her with just a text message and my word, she'll twist the story, turn it against you, make you out to be the bad guy. Greg's jaw tightened further. He didn't want to hear it, but he knew I was right. After a long silence, he exhaled. So what do we do? I hesitated, then before I could overthink it, I pulled up a number on my phone and hit dial. The call rang twice before a voice answered. Didn't expect to hear from you again so soon, Lorna said, her tone wary. At the sound of her name, Greg stiffened. I need you to do something for me, I said, keeping my voice flat. A pause. Then, cautiously, she asked, what? I took a deep breath. Meet me. Right now. Silence. Then finally, she asked, where? I glanced at Greg. He gave a small nod. At your place, I answered. And bring your phone. You're going to call Nolan. We sat in the car, parked across the street from my old house. The lights inside were on, and through the window I could see Lorna pacing. Greg tapped impatiently on the steering wheel. You sure she'll go through with it? I nodded. She's desperate to make things right. She'll call him. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A message from Lorna, he's picking up. Listen in. I put her on speaker. The line clicked. Lorna. Nolan's voice carried a cautious edge, like he already sensed something was off. You need to tell me the truth, Lorna said, her voice unsteady. How many women have there been? A long silence. Then finally Nolan let out a slow sigh. Does it matter? Beside me, Greg went rigid, his whole body coiled with tension. Yes, it matters, Lorna snapped. Were you with Melissa? Another pause. Then, with casual indifference, Nolan replied, You really want the list, sweetheart? Because, trust me, you weren't special. Greg's grip on the dashboard was so tight I thought he might tear it apart. Lorna's voice wavered. I trusted you. Nolan let out a low chuckle. That's on you then, isn't it? I could hear Lorna's breath hitch. Then, a beat later, she asked, And what about Curtis? What about Greg? Nolan laughed, the sound cold and dismissive. Curtis? Come on. You think I was worried about him? He was never gonna find out. And Greg? Well, Melissa's had her fun. I don't see why she should stop now. That was it. Greg shoved open the car door and stormed toward the house. I barely had time to react before I was right behind him. Lorna flung the door open just as Greg reached the porch, her expression filled with alarm. "Greg, wait." But he brushed past her, heading straight for the kitchen. Melissa stood there, frozen in place, her phone still clutched in her hand. As her gaze met Greg's, the color drained from her face. "Greg," he cut her off. "Don't. Just don't." Her lips parted, but no words came out. She knew. She had known all along. Without another word, Greg pulled off his wedding ring, placed it on the counter, and walked out. I followed. As we stepped onto the porch, Greg let out a slow, measured breath. "I'm done." I nodded. "Me too." For a long moment, we stood in silence. Two men who had just lost everything. And yet, for the first time in a long while, I felt something else, something unexpected. Relief. The night air was cold, wrapping around us as the weight of everything settled in. It was over. No more lies. No more betrayals. No more clinging to something that had already crumbled. Greg let out a deep breath and turned to me. "So, what now?" I managed a small, tired smile. "Yeah?" "We move forward." He let out a short scoff. "Forward. Sounds easy when you say it." I shrugged. "It's not. But it's better than staying stuck in this mess." For the first time in days, something shifted inside me. The anger, the pain, it was still there. But it wasn't everything anymore. There was something else. Freedom. The next few weeks blurred into a cycle of paperwork, difficult conversations, and unraveling the life I had built with Lorna. She tried, of course. She called. Sent messages. Begged me to talk. But I was done. I wasn't going to let her back in. I managed to find a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was mine. No lingering shadows from the past. No painful reminders of a love that had unraveled into deceit. Just a blank slate, a place where I could start over. Greg and I stayed in touch. When you go through something as devastating as betrayal with someone else, it forges a bond that few other experiences can. We would meet up for drinks, exchange horror stories about our divorce lawyers, and even find humor in the sheer absurdity of everything we had endured. One evening, as we sat at the bar, Greg nudged my arm and gave me a knowing look. "So, when are you putting yourself back out there?" I arched an eyebrow. "Back where?" He smirked. "Dating. You know, that thing people do when they're not married to unfaithful spouses." I let out a short laugh and shook my head. "Not anytime soon." "Come on, man," he pressed. "Not everyone is like them." I exhaled deeply. "I know. I just need time." And for the first time, I truly meant it. I wasn't consumed by resentment. I wasn't emotionally closed off. I wasn't going to let the betrayal define the rest of my life. I simply needed space to rediscover who I was. And for the first time in a long while, I felt completely okay with that. A year later, my life had transformed. A new job. A different apartment. A deep, quiet sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. One morning, while grabbing coffee, I unexpectedly ran into Greg. He was sitting at a table, smiling, genuinely smiling, across from a woman I had never seen before. I raised an eyebrow in curiosity. He simply grinned and mouthed, "Later." And in that moment, I felt happy for him. Because the truth is, betrayal doesn't have to break you. It can shape you, strengthen you. And sometimes losing everything turns out to be exactly what you needed to finally find yourself.